Welcome to the Human Rights classes. This is the class on the Human Rights Act 1998. My name is Nasir Fizi. I'm a solicitor and a senior lecturer in law. This class explores how the Human Rights Act 1998 incorporates and gives effect to the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, within the UK legal system, transforming international obligations into domestic law and providing citizens with direct access to their convention rights in UK courts. The learning outcomes for this is to historical context, understand the UK's relationship with the European Convention on Human Rights before the Human Rights Act 1998, key provisions that provide an overview of the main sections of the Human Rights Act 1998, public authorities explain the obligations under Section 6 and enforcement mechanisms, standing and remedies, understand who can bring claims and what remedies are available, and practical applications, how the Human Rights Act works in practice and its impact. As always, there are true and false questions to test your knowledge, and the answers are at the end of the class. So question 1 is true or false: before the Human Rights Act 1998, individuals could directly enforce convention rights in the UK courts. Question 2, true or false: Section 2 of the Human Rights Act 1998 requires UK courts to follow decisions of the European Convention on Human Rights. Question 3, true or false: Section 3 of the Human Rights Act 1998 requires legislation to be interpreted compatibly with convention rights so far as it is possible to do so. Question 4, true or false: a declaration of incompatibility under Section 4 invalidates the legislation in question. Question 5, true or false: Section 6 makes it unlawful for public authorities, including courts, to act incompatibly with convention rights. Question 6, true or false: only natural persons, individual human beings, can qualify as victims under Section 7 of the Human Rights Act 1998. Question 7, true or false: claims under Section 7 must normally be brought within 1 year of the alleged breach. Question 8, true or false: courts may set aside incompatible delegated legislation but cannot invalidate incompatible primary legislation. Question 9, true or false: absolute rights under the European Convention on Human Rights may be restricted if Parliament expresses or expressly authorises the restriction. And question 10, true or false: Section 8 allows courts to award damages where necessary to afford just satisfaction. Again, there's also some single best answer questions. Again, it's to test your knowledge, and again there are the answers at the end of this video in this class. Question 1, Parliament passes the Public Gathering Act 2026, which states that spouses of licensed street performers may apply for compensation if the performer is injured while performing. Alex, who was in a legally recognised same-sex marriage with a performer, applies for compensation. The public authority refuses, arguing that Parliament intended spouses to refer only to opposite sex couples. In the case, if the case reached the High Court, what is the most appropriate approach under the Human Rights Act 1998? Is the answer A, courts must apply the wording strictly and dismiss the claim? Is it B, the courts must issue a declaration of incompatibility under Section 4? Is it C, the court must interpret the legislation compatibly with convention rights so far as possible? Is it D, the courts must strike down the Act of Parliament? Or is it E, the court must refer the case directly to the European Court of Human Rights? Question 2, Maria's local council introduces a policy banning all protests in a public park without exception. Maria argues this breaches her Article 11 right to freedom of assembly. Which of the following best reflects the legal position under the Human Rights Act 1998? Is it A, the council is not bound by the Human Rights Act because it is not central government? Is it B, the council may act incompatibly with convention rights if it believes it is acting in the public interest? Is it C, the council is a public authority and must not act incompatibly with convention rights? Is it D, Maria must first bring her claim in Strasbourg before relying on the Human Rights Act? Or is it E, the Human Rights Act does not apply to local authority policies? Question 3, single best answer question here is a claimant challenges a provision in an Act of Parliament that clearly conflicts with Article 8 European Convention on Human Rights, the Court concludes that it is not possible to interpret the legislation compatibly under Section 3. What is the most appropriate judicial response? Is it A, strike down the legislation as unconstitutional, B, refuse to apply the legislation in this case only? Is it C, issue a declaration of incompatibility under Section 4, D, amend the wording of the legislation, or is it E, automatically award damages to the claimant? So let's look at the context of the Human Rights Act, so historical context before the Human Rights Act 1998. So the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, is an international treaty created by the Council of Europe following the atrocities of World War II. The UK ratified the European Convention on Human Rights in 1951, accepting international obligations to protect fundamental rights. For example, the right to life, Article 2, right to liberty, Article 5, right to respect privacy, Article 8. However, before the Human Rights Act, individuals could not directly enforce convention rights in UK courts. Claims required taking cases to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. This process was lengthy, expensive, and inaccessible to many. The key provisions of the Human Rights Act 1998, let's go through these. Section 1, Convention Rights. This incorporates and gives effect to convention rights, such as Articles 2 to 12 and 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights, Articles 1 to 3 of the First Protocol, and Articles 1 to of the 13th Protocol. Section 2 is about interpretation of the convention rights. UK courts must take into account European courts' human rights judgments, but are not bound to follow them. And Section 3 talks about interpretation of legislation. Primary and secondary legislation must be read and give effect in a way which is compatible with convention rights, but does not affect the validity of incompatible primary and secondary legislation. That therefore upholds parliamentary supremacy. And Section 4, Declarations of Incompatibility. High courts may issue declarations of incompatibility for primary and secondary legislation. These provisions create a framework of protecting rights, human rights, while respecting parliamentary sovereignty. And I do encourage you to have a look at these rights by looking at the Human Rights Act 1998. Key provisions, again, Section 6 makes it unlawful for public authorities to act in compatibility with convention rights. Sections 7 and 8 establishes who can bring proceedings, time limits and remedies including damages. Sections 10, fast-track procedures for changing legislation through remedial orders if they're considered to be incompatible. Section 19, ministers must make statements of compatibility when introducing new legislation. So on the front sheet of the bill that's going through Parliament, there needs to be a declaration to state whether it's compatible with the human rights and convention rights. Sections 6 to 8 are particularly important for bringing claims for breaching human rights. They are the procedural elements and also the remedies available. Let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So Section 3, interpreting legislation. It says, insofar as it is possible to do so, primary and subordinate legislation must be read and give effect in a way which is compatible with the convention rights. This applies to both past and future legislation, creating a powerful interpretive obligation for courts. The controversial applications, some argue courts have used Section 3 more widely than Parliament intended. In the Gladen versus Godin Mendoza 2004, the House of Lords interpreted as his or her wife or husband to include same-sex couples. This demonstrates how Section 3 can lead to interpretations that adapt legislation to changing human rights standards. Section 4 is about the declaration of incompatibility. When Section 3 interpretation is not possible, high courts may issue declaration of incompatibility. Remember, it does not invalidate the legislation, does not bind the parties to proceedings, but it does create a political pressure on government to change the law. This preserves parliamentary sovereignty while highlighting human rights concerns. The declaration serves as a formal notification to Parliament that legislation requires amendments to comply with human rights obligations. Section 6 refers to public authorities, so when a claimant can make a claim against, who a claimant can make a claim against. The core obligation is this: it is unlawful for a public authority to act in a way incompatible with convention rights, and that does include courts and any person whose function is of a public nature. The exception here does not apply if the authority could not have acted differently due to primary legislation or when enforcing incompatible provisions. There's a legal impact here, creates a freestanding cause of action for breaching of convention rights, adds a ground of challenge in judicial review breach of a convention right. In R versus Beer versus Hampshire Farmers Market 2003, the Court of Appeal held that public body and public authority are synonymous, the same, simplifying claims that combine traditional judicial review grounds and with convention rights. Public authorities and delegated legislation. This is an important point here. Courts are public authorities. Courts themselves are public authorities under Section 6, creating an obligation to apply convention rights in all cases. This creates a horizontality. Convention rights can affect relations between private citizens, not just state relations, and we'll be looking at conflicts of rights 8 and 10 later on in our classes, but the courts here have to comply, are considered public authorities and therefore are obligated to apply convention rights in all cases. When it comes to delegated legislation, while courts must apply acts of parliament that are incompatible with convention rights, they may set aside incompatible delegated legislation. So, for example, in A versus Secretary of State for the Home Department, the House of Lords quashed delegated legislation that was incompatible with convention rights. Section 7 refers to standing, who can bring claims, so the victim requirement. Section 7 states that only a victim of a breach can bring proceedings. Individuals directly or personally affected, non-government organisations, companies, political parties, trade unions, close relatives as that indirect victims in certain cases, for example Articles 2 or 3 breaches where a victim is dead. Pressure groups can also generally when it comes to pressure groups, pressure groups lack standing under Section 7, so they can't, but there is an exception, and that's found in the case of Verin, Kelman, Semnorin, Swartz. Pressure groups may have standing in climate change cases if lawfully established, the purposes of defending human rights against climate change, and genuinely qualified and representative. This exception is limited to climate change context. And check out that case law there. When it comes to bringing a claim, you can see there's a figure there. Have a look at that more closely. But claims must be brought in the appropriate court. For example, employment rights claims in the employment tribunal. A victim can also rely on convention rights as a defence in any legal proceedings. There's time limit. Section 7.5 proceedings must be brought within 1 year of the alleged breach, subject to any shorter time limits for specific proceedings, for example judicial review time limits. So remember that generally it's 1 year, but specific cases in particular courts it could be a lot shorter. Time limit protocol number 15, 4 months to the European Court of Human Rights too. So if you have to go there, it's 4 months. Judicial review remedies, very important. Section 8, damages. Section 8.3, courts can award damages for breach of convention of rights where necessary to afford just satisfaction. The principle here is Section 8.4, courts must take into account principles laid down by the European Court of Human Rights when deciding on damages. Alternative remedies, in many cases other remedies may be sufficient, for example quashing orders in judicial review. And common law actions, often there will be common law causes of action, for example misuse of private information, under which damages can be awarded. The convention rights overview, we've looked at this in a previous class, but there are basically 3 types of rights. Absolute rights cannot be interfered with under any circumstances, for example Article 3 of the prohibition of torture. Limited rights can be restricted only in specific circumstances defined in the convention itself, so for example Article 6, and then you've got qualified rights, for example Article 8, can be balanced against the rights of others or wider public interest. The impact of the Human Rights Act 1998, well, there are positive impacts, but there are also ongoing debates. Significant reduction in cases against UK at the European Court of Human Rights. That's considered to be a positive impact. Domestic resolution of human rights issues, development of UK human rights jurisprudence, and greater accessibility for citizens and others seeking to enforce rights. But there are ongoing debates, and these are in the news pretty much every week. Judicial interpretation versus parliamentary sovereignty. The scope of Section 3 interpretive obligation is considered to be controversial. The definition of obligations on public authorities and the horizontal application between private parties. And we are going to look at the debates on the Human Rights Act in future classes in more detail. So going back to true and false questions, you can see the true and false here. Please feel free to pause the video and check out the next slide. I hope you got the answers correct. Let's look at the single best answer questions. Look at that. Read it for yourself. Feel free to pause it and check out the answers here. And there's a bit of an explanation for the answers too. Finally, summary of key takeaways. International to domestic. So the Human Rights Act, remember, 1998, transforms International European Convention on Human Rights Obligations into direct enforceable domestic rights. You've got the public authority obligation under Section 6. Section 6 makes it unlawful for public authorities, that's like the police or hospitals or the Home Department, includes courts as well, to act incompatibly with convention rights. So Section 6 makes it unlawful for public authorities, including courts, to act incompatibly with convention rights. You've got the standing requirement, which is important. Section 7, only victims can bring claims with limited exceptions for climate change cases or in pressure group cases. And you've got judicial remedies. Section 8, courts can provide remedies, including damages where necessary for just satisfaction. The Human Rights Act 1998 has fundamentally changed the UK human rights landscape, bringing rights home and making them accessible to all citizens and people in domestic courts. But debates remain about the Human Rights Act, and we will explore them for sure in future classes. And I'm sure you'll hear about it in the news as well. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe for future classes on Human Rights Act. Hope you found this useful for your studies if you're studying LLB, PGDL or SQE or even ALO. Thank you for watching and see you in the next class.